Welcome to KW Conversations, where we discuss the workforce and education issues that matter in the Louisville region. This show is brought to you by KentuckianaWorks, the region's Workforce Development Board.
All right. Hello, I'm Mike Carmen with KentuckianaWorks, and I'm talking today with Drew Tucker. We're specifically talking about a great grant that KentuckianaWorks was able to get called Generation Work. That funding comes down from Annie E. Casey and the National Fund. We have several community partners actively engaged in this project, as well as some young adults, which we're very excited about. The grant very quickly focuses on worker voice, racial equity, and really how we as workforce partners talk about young adults with employer partners. So I'm really excited to talk to Drew, who back in December, at the end of last year, moderated a forum for us, which was basically a long table, and we had young adult workers, and we had some representatives from some great employers here in Louisville. So it was a very exciting hour and a half, Drew.
Yeah, I think that, well, you got to say, Mike, the most exciting part is we did it on a boat.
And we did it on a boat. Very true. Thanks to the Belle of Louisville. We were actually on the Mary Miller. We didn't get to go out on the river, but we were sitting there floating, which was awesome. Drew, tell folks who you are, what you do, who you work for, and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Right off the bat, I want to say thank you so much for doing this, Mike. KentuckianaWorks is such a great partner. The Generation Work project is an incredibly interesting project, and it's really cool to be able to work on something that has a number of overlaps that you're interested in. For instance, youth employment, employment in general in the city of Louisville, in the state of Kentucky, and then how do we kind of connect the dots between those things? So I'm really honored to be a part of it. So thank you, first of all.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm Drew Tucker. I am the director of strategy at KERTIS. We are a kind of a mid-sized creative agency here in Louisville, Kentucky. We often say that we live and work in Smoketown, but since COVID, we've all kind of moved around and changed offices, so we're kind of all over the place now.
Sure.
But yeah, really excited to bring sort of strategic support and messaging support to the project. Absolutely.
So when we approached you about moderating this conversation, what were your kind of initial thoughts? What goals did you set, if you will, for kind of what this was going to look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I don't know about I really love doing facilitation, and at KERTIS, I'm sort of lucky to be one of two strategists here in the building. So I tend to be the person who moderates these big conversations when we're able or invited to do that.
Sure.
Really, I mean, at KERTIS, like our biggest project, what we're trying to do in the world is mitigate communication problems. That's really a baseline, what we're trying to do. And so to be asked to facilitate is a thing that feels really natural to us. And so we kind of start every project like that the same way. I try to set a goal, which is where do we want to be at the end of the day? Like, what's the big sort of outcome we want? And then I kind of backpedal and set 3 objectives. And the objectives for me are just, what are those sort of mile markers or goalposts that would tell us that we're going the right way? So with this project, with the KentuckianaWorks Generation Work project, the main goal was really simple. How do we create a room full of folks that can learn, where we create the situation for people to learn from young adults about what keeps them in or out of the workforce? And
Right.
How do we do that in a way where like youth is the major voice? So employers can chime in and they can give us feedback and be a part of that conversation. But how do we sort of center youth as the main voice in that? And so that was really my focus going in. That's kind of how we set that up.
Gotcha. Excellent, Drew. Kind of thinking through that. So you had this planning process and the way you typically lay things out when you're going to moderate a conversation. Were there moments that kind of surprised you about the conversation as it unfolded on that day?
Oh, there's always surprises. Sometimes they're like not good surprises, but this is not one of those cases, right? I mean, right off the bat, and I really do mean this sincerely, the strength of the partners that KentuckianaWorks has cultivated is pretty remarkable. I mean, it's sort of funny when you get invited to do these facilitations, you expect a certain amount of stress or sort of friction between the people you're going to be kind of moderating. And I have to say, I was almost unnecessary given the strength of the partners and the folks who are in this room. I mean, incredible speakers, incredibly dedicated employers who are really desperately trying to build a new youthful workforce, and a bunch of young folks who desperately want to work and want meaningful employment. So all the right parts were there. But the other two surprises that kind of came out of the conversation that developed over that hour or 2 hours were, I'll say two things I think that were really powerful. One, what young people want from employment and what smart employers know that they need from a new workforce are shockingly similar. This is good news for KentuckianaWorks, right?
Right,
This is
right.
but you wouldn't think, like you would it's that conversation is posed as sort of like how do we fix this, or how do we make this work? But they're actually very much saying they want the same things. There's this need for a communication to action infrastructure, right? So what I heard from the employers and from the youth is it's not enough to hear youth voices. We need some infrastructure to activate and innovate their ideas and to reward them for having them. And so I think that this sort of like, what I just called this sort of like communication to action infrastructure was a big need that was spoken and shared by both groups. So that was one. I thought that was really powerful. The second thing I'll say, the big takeaway for me was, and I think this is right, it felt this way to me and from the other research we've done with you guys, is that the major changes that need to take place in the workplace aren't multi-million-dollar tech upgrades. Good news, employers, good news, bosses. You don't have to spend $1 billion to do this, which is great news. They're basic communication, innovation, and implementation infrastructure upgrades. These are minor costs, but major cultural shifts, though, right? What we're talking about is not how do you recreate the workplace, but how do you sort of recreate the culture in the workplace? And a lot of that's just going to be hiring young people that are diverse, that have new perspectives, and creating a space where they can say what they need to say. You can hear them, and then you can implement that work. So I think it's a real good a real good time historically to feel this change.
Right, Drew. I'm going to push back a little bit on that you didn't need to be in the room, but you did a beautiful job. I will say you didn't have to pull answers or responses out of people, though. I
Not
mean,
at all.
folks were eager to share. And you heard employers kind of hearkening back to when they were first in the workforce as young people, a question you kind of posed to them, and just the commonality of experience. It was pretty interesting.
Absolutely.
So were there moments during that hour and a half that gave you concern, or counter to that, were there moments that kind of gave you hope or inspired you during the day?
It's such a great question. I've thought about this a lot over the last couple of days. When I think about what gave me pause or concern, it's not really a problem of the people in this room. But I think it needs to be said that there's beyond the cultural shifts that need to happen, and that I think employers and new workforces will make in the workplace. I think that's possible. I think that through things like KentuckianaWorks and Generation Works project, those changes will happen. But there's a bigger problem that's a little bit more fundamental. It's kind of a systems problem. This is, without being too boring or academic, this is kind of my background, is thinking about systems across cities. And we live in a world where we have encouraged businesses to not want to pay tax. And we have a dearth of infrastructure. We attract those businesses by promising them tax breaks. And then our cities can't develop. So we don't have good bus routes. We don't have good bus stations. We don't have, bike infrastructure. We don't have social services. And then we have families in neighborhoods that are struggling. Like we have these families in neighborhoods where they've been redlined and segregated. And then the product of that is these young people who are struggling. And then what do we need? The workforce, we need more people to work. And we don't have the workforce because we don't have people who can leave their home lives and set their outside work struggles aside to come to work. And so we've really built a little bit of a problematic spiral for ourselves. And so all that sounds really dire, but again, I think we have all the tools we need to fix it. I think it's just about asking, how do we curate these kind of conversations, not just with employers and employees, but where's the city? Like, where's the state? And I think that those folks are willing to have those conversations as well. I think it's just going to take really powerful partners or convening organizations like KentuckianaWorks to bring that together. So it's a tough problem, but it's totally solvable. I just think we're ready for that conversation.
Sure.
Yeah. And then when it's funny, Mike, you said what makes me hopeful. I try not to mess with hope too much. I find that to be I find hope to be one of those things that like oftentimes let you off the hook of working. And so what I do instead is I try to talk about what I see in the room that's happening, that's powerful and just needs to be supported maybe.
Okay.
And I'll tell you this. This is the thing that just really gave me goosebumps when it happened in the meeting. One of the young people in the meeting was told this story. And they said, we were talking about part of the communications problems between young folks and employers. And this young adult said, one time they had been in the job for a number of months. They were really excelling. They found the job to be really fulfilling, and their car broke down. Happens to all of us, right?
Sure.
Obviously, there's some infrastructural problems. They can't get the bus, can't get there. So they call their employer and they explain what's going on. And the employer what they heard was, this person's not coming to work and I need to be punitive, right? And so that caused this like a problem between them and the employee. And I don't know if they're still there or what, but it wasn't a good feeling.
Sure.
And the employee left, the young person left feeling like I wasn't heard and this is bad. That was one story. The employers on the panel heard that story. And then I asked the question, what strengths do young people bring to the workforce? And the employers on the panel who just heard that story interpreted that story this way. They said, wow, I'm really excited to hear young people, like this young person who talked about this job, the problem they had, the car breakdown, as being really good communicators and having really good time management skills. To me, that reframe was incredibly powerful, because what I hear there is that employers in Louisville know how to listen and know how to hear their employees and are ready to meet them halfway. And I thought that was really powerful. So
yeah, I think I recall the same moment. And if I'm remembering correctly, this young adult was also doing everything they could to still meet their schedule and their obligations. They were taking the TARC. It didn't take them all the way there. They had a distance to walk. I mean, the grit involved in being that committed to the role, and then still, to your point, being met kind of punitively. Even though, isn't this what we want out of an employee, is this commitment? So that was an interesting and powerful moment. I agree.
Yeah, I thought that was great.
All right, Drew, so just kind of wrapping up, do you see a future for these types of conversations, or these forums, if you will, and what could be gained by kind of normalizing these kinds of conversations?
I mean, absolutely. I think there's a huge, not only a future, I think there's a necessity for these kinds of conversations, and even more robust conversations. For sure, the energy's there across employers and youth. Like, there was nobody who didn't want to be there and nobody who didn't show up ready to talk. I think each person on that panel could have had a 2-hour conversation on their own. That being said, I don't think there's any reason that the next 10 of these that KentuckianaWorks facilitates couldn't be even real life working sessions with employers to learn, ideate, and maybe even design the infrastructures that they need to stay relevant and attractive in the 21st century. You can imagine, a really powerful worker youth design charrette to sort of start to imagine these infrastructures that would help youth connect with these positions. And I just, to answer the second part of your question, I think what we'd be normalizing by having more of these dialogues is sort of a workplace culture that's about being comfortable with change and growth. If we get this right, then we won't need to have these huge conversations about cultural change every 20, 30 years, right? Which we keep doing. Instead, we'll sort of internalize the ability to adapt, some tactics and abilities to adapt to these things as they come up. And I think that's the real toolkit we could sort of leave folks with by doing these kind of conversations. So I hope that there's 100 more of these, and I hope I'm a part of most of them. So yeah.
All right, Drew. Well, I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate your time back in December as well, moderating the conversation. And I hope we can plan some more of these in the future. Just as a witness to it, it was just awesome and inspiring to be a part of. So
thank you so much, Mike. Yeah, it was a huge pleasure. Anytime. Absolutely anytime.
Awesome. Well, you have a good day, Drew.
You too,
Thank
man.
you.
See you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to KW Conversations. Visit KentuckianaWorks.org to find labor market data, resources for job seekers and employers, and much more.